Chosen one of the biggest mistakes your enemies ever made was assuming you were alone. They looked at your circumstances and made a calculation. They counted your visible resources. They measured your current position. They looked at what they could see with their natural eyes and concluded that you were isolated, unsupported, and easy to overwhelm. But that conclusion was based on incomplete information, because some of the most powerful forms of protection never announce themselves. Some people are defended by influence. Some people are defended by money. But favored individuals are often defended by something far greater: divine networking. And that kind of networking operates behind the scenes. While your enemies are sitting in circles plotting your downfall, your name is being spoken in rooms of power you haven't even walked into yet. You aren't just being protected. You are being strategically positioned by unseen forces. And the moment the enemy realizes who is actually backing you, their entire plan will crumble. That is the reality many chosen ones fail to recognize during difficult seasons. They assume they must personally fight every battle. They assume they must defend themselves against every attack. They assume every obstacle depends entirely on their own strength. Meanwhile, help is already moving. Doors are already shifting. Conversations are already happening. People are already being positioned. And protection is already being arranged long before the chosen one becomes aware of it. That is why some attacks never reach you. That is why certain plans collapse before they can fully form. That is why unexpected allies appear at exactly the right moment. It is not always coincidence. Sometimes it is favor. Sometimes it is alignment. Sometimes it is a security detail operating beyond your field of vision. And today we are going to talk about why the enemy is becoming increasingly terrified of who is secretly backing you, why protection often arrives through unexpected channels, and why the forces moving on your behalf are far greater than your enemies ever imagined. One of the most comforting truths a chosen one can discover is this: not every battle reaches you. There are attacks you never hear about, conversations you never witness, plans you never become aware of, opportunities for harm that disappear before they ever enter your reality. And because you never see them, it is easy to assume they never existed. But that is often how protection works. The most effective security is not the danger you survive. It is the danger you never encounter. Read that again. The most effective security is not the danger you survive. It is the danger you never encounter. That is why protection often feels invisible. Many chosen ones imagine divine protection as something dramatic: a last-second rescue, a miraculous escape, a visible intervention that everyone can recognize. And sometimes it does happen that way. But more often, protection is quiet. A conversation happens without your knowledge. A decision changes behind the scenes. A person's heart shifts unexpectedly. An opportunity for harm disappears before it reaches your doorstep. And you continue moving forward without ever realizing what was prevented. That is what makes the invisible security detail so powerful, because it operates in layers. Some layers are spiritual. Some layers are human. Some layers appear as intuition that tells you not to go somewhere. Some layers appear as unexpected delays. Some layers appear as strangers who step forward at exactly the right moment. Some layers appear as people speaking your name positively in rooms you have never entered. The chosen one often thinks they are navigating life alone because they can only see one piece of the picture. But the reality is far more complex. There are people who respect you whom you have never met. There are individuals quietly advocating for you without your knowledge. There are opportunities being preserved for you before you even know they exist. There are conversations taking place that will eventually benefit your path. And while all of this is happening, your enemies are working with incomplete information. That is their problem. They only see what is visible. They only calculate what is obvious. They only prepare for what they can measure. And because of that, they consistently underestimate the support surrounding a chosen one. Think about how many times something unexpectedly worked out after looking impossible. How many times a door opened after every logical indicator suggested it should remain closed. How many times a situation shifted at the exact moment you needed it to? Many people call that luck. Chosen ones often recognize something deeper. Alignment. Because protection is not always about stopping an attack directly. Sometimes it is about repositioning people, reorganizing circumstances, redirecting events, creating pathways that make the attack ineffective before it ever reaches its target. That is why your enemies become confused. From their perspective, certain outcomes should have happened. Certain plans should have worked. Certain obstacles should have stopped you. Yet somehow, things keep shifting. The timing changes. The circumstances change. The people involved change. And the outcome refuses to cooperate with their expectations. What they are experiencing is the frustration of fighting an opponent they cannot fully see. Because they thought they were dealing with one person. They never considered the possibility that an entire invisible security detail was already standing watch. One of the most fascinating things about divine favor is that it does not always destroy an attack. Sometimes it redirects it. This is where many chosen ones become confused because they expect protection to look like immediate victory. They expect every obstacle to disappear. They expect every enemy to be removed instantly. They expect every challenge to be blocked before it ever develops. But often, protection works in a much more strategic way. Instead of eliminating the situation, it changes the outcome. Instead of stopping the process, it changes who benefits from it. Instead of removing the system, it causes the system to operate differently than your enemies intended. And that is exactly what terrifies them. Because there is nothing more frustrating than investing enormous resources into a plan only to watch those same resources begin working against you. Read that again. There is nothing more frustrating than investing enormous resources into a plan only to watch those same resources begin working against you. Many enemies assume institutions, policies, procedures, rules, or influential people will automatically support their agenda. They believe authority can be manipulated. They believe narratives can be controlled. They believe systems can be pressured into producing the outcome they want. For a season, it may even appear that way. Doors close. Processes slow down. Obstacles emerge. Pressure increases. And the chosen one begins wondering why everything feels so difficult. But while the chosen one is focused on the challenge, something else is happening behind the scenes. The facts are being reviewed. The patterns are becoming visible. The inconsistencies are being noticed. The truth is slowly separating itself from the narrative. And suddenly the very structures that appeared hostile begin changing direction. The same rules that seem to work against you begin protecting you. The same procedures that caused delays begin exposing flaws in the attack. The same institutions that were expected to support your enemies begin demanding accountability from them instead. That shift is devastating, because manipulators are prepared for resistance. What they are not prepared for is reversal. They are not prepared for the moment the system stops cooperating. They are not prepared for the moment the narrative stops working. They are not prepared for the moment people start asking different questions. Questions they never expected to answer. Questions about motives. Questions about conduct. Questions about decisions. Questions about patterns. And suddenly the attention moves. Not toward you. Toward them. That is when panic begins. Because they realize the energy they spent constructing the attack has unintentionally created a record of their own behavior. The process they hoped would silence you is now preserving evidence. The rules they expected to weaponize are now demanding consistency from everyone involved. That is the irony of divine redirection. The chosen one does not always need the system to disappear. Sometimes the system simply needs to operate according to truth. And once truth enters the equation, manipulation starts losing its influence. That is why so many enemies become frustrated near the end of the battle. They keep expecting the old strategy to work. They keep expecting the same outcome. They keep expecting control. Meanwhile, the current has already changed direction. The very resources they trusted most are no longer moving where they intended. and that realization forces them to confront something deeply uncomfortable. The forces protecting the chosen one are capable of turning obstacles into advantages and attacks into evidence. One of the greatest mistakes your enemies make is believing your survival is random. They look at everything you have endured and call it luck. They see the doors that opened, the disasters that never fully landed, the recoveries that should have taken much longer, and they convince themselves that somehow you just got fortunate. But chosen one, there is a difference between luck and preservation. Luck is accidental. Preservation is intentional. And what has happened in your life has been far too consistent to be explained by accident alone. Because heaven does not protect things that have no purpose. Read that again. Heaven does not protect things that have no purpose. That is why your journey has often felt so unusual. There were moments when you should have completely collapsed under the weight of what you were carrying. There were seasons when the pressure seemed impossible. There were situations that looked final, situations that appeared designed to remove you from the path entirely. Yet somehow you remained, not unchanged, but standing, not untouched, but moving forward. And that persistence is not something your enemies understand, because they are evaluating your life through a short-term lens. They are looking at today's circumstances, today's obstacles, today's challenges. They are focused on the immediate situation. Heaven is focused on the assignment. That is the difference. A person protecting a short-term outcome thinks differently than someone protecting a long-term investment. When an investor sees something valuable, they do not evaluate it based solely on today's performance. They evaluate its future potential. They evaluate what it can become. They evaluate what it will eventually contribute. In the same way, many chosen ones are being preserved because their story is larger than their current season. Their influence is larger than their current struggle. Their purpose is larger than their present obstacle. And the forces protecting them understand that. That is why certain battles never fully succeed. That is why certain attacks mysteriously lose momentum. That is why certain setbacks become setups for something greater. Because preservation is taking place. Your enemies only see the present version of you. Heaven sees the future impact. Your enemies see a person. Heaven sees an assignment. Your enemies see a temporary circumstance. Heaven sees generations that may be affected by what you are building. That perspective changes everything. Because once you understand that you are being protected as an investment, many confusing experiences begin making sense. The delays make sense. The redirections make sense. The closed doors make sense. Even certain disappointments begin looking different. Not every denial was rejection. Some denials were protection. Not every delay was punishment. Some delays were preparation. Not every loss was destruction. Some losses were preservation. That is what makes this so difficult for your enemies to understand. They keep trying to evaluate your journey using ordinary logic. They keep assuming the battle is only about the present moment. They keep assuming your survival is a coincidence. Meanwhile, forces far beyond their awareness are protecting something they cannot fully see. Because heaven is not protecting you simply because of where you are. It is protecting you because of where you are going. There comes a point in every failed attack when confidence turns into confusion, and confusion turns into fear. Because in the beginning, your enemies believed they understood the situation. They believed they had calculated every variable. They believed they knew exactly how the story would end. From their perspective, the outcome seemed obvious. They had the strategy. They had the influence. They had the resources. They had the numbers. And you were supposed to lose. That was the assumption. But then something unexpected happened. The plan stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. The delays did not destroy you. The pressure did not break you. The isolation did not weaken you. The obstacles did not stop you. Instead, you kept moving forward. Slowly at first. Then steadily. Then with a confidence that made even less sense to them. That is when confusion begins entering the picture. Because people become uncomfortable when reality refuses to match their expectations. They start looking for explanations. They start searching for hidden variables. They start asking questions they never thought they would need to ask. How did that opportunity appear? Why did that door open? Who is helping them? Why didn't the attack work? Why does everything keep shifting at the last moment? The more these questions accumulate, the more unsettled they become. Because deep down, they are starting to realize something they never wanted to admit. There are forces involved that they cannot control. Read that again. There are forces involved that they cannot control. And that realization creates enormous anxiety for people who are used to manipulating outcomes. Because manipulation depends on leverage. It depends on influence. It depends on pressure. It depends on having access to something that can be controlled. But what happens when the thing protecting the chosen one cannot be bribed, cannot be pressured, cannot be intimidated, cannot be negotiated with? That is where paranoia begins. Not because the chosen one is doing anything threatening, because the enemy can no longer understand why their usual methods keep failing. Every time they think they have identified the weakness, the situation changes. Every time they think they have closed every door, another one opens. Every time they think they have finally cornered the chosen one, something unexpected shifts. And over time, this creates a psychological burden. They start watching more closely. They start overanalyzing every development. They start looking for hidden connections. They start becoming consumed by questions they cannot answer. Meanwhile, the chosen one often remains focused on growth, healing, and purpose, completely unaware of how much mental energy is being spent trying to understand their protection. That is the irony. The enemy becomes trapped by the very obsession that was supposed to trap you. They become distracted by the very battle they thought they were controlling. They become consumed by a puzzle they cannot solve. Because the answer is not found in strategy. The answer is found in favor. And favor cannot be calculated by people who only understand control. That is why the battle starts feeling hopeless to them. Not because they lost one confrontation. Because they are slowly realizing they were never fighting one person. They were fighting against a level of protection that exists beyond their reach. Chosen one, after everything you've been through, there is one truth that heaven wants you to understand. Your protection is not temporary. It is not based on public opinion. It is not dependent on who supports you this week or who opposes you next month. And it is certainly not determined by the people trying to negotiate your worth. Because your assignment was never put up for a vote. Read that again. Your assignment was never put up for a vote. One of the reasons your enemies become so frustrated is because they keep treating your calling like something that can be revoked. They believe enough pressure can remove it. They believe enough criticism can weaken it. They believe enough opposition can somehow convince heaven to change its mind. But purpose does not operate that way. What is assigned by decree cannot be canceled by opinion. What is protected by decree cannot be destroyed by resentment. What is established by decree cannot be negotiated away by people who were never given authority over it. That is why so many attacks eventually collapse under their own weight. The attack was built on a false assumption. The assumption that your destiny required their permission. It doesn't. The assumption that your path depended on their approval. It doesn't. The assumption that your future could be blocked by their resistance. It can't, because the protection surrounding a chosen one is deeper than circumstances. It is deeper than popularity. It is deeper than temporary setbacks. It is connected to purpose, and purpose carries its own protection. That does not mean you will never face challenges. It does not mean every season will be easy. It does not mean there will never be battles. What it means is that the outcome has already been decided at a higher level than your enemies can reach. That is why you can stop living in fear. That is why you can stop obsessing over every attack. That is why you can stop worrying about every rumor, every critic, and every attempt to slow your progress. Because what heaven has established cannot be overturned by earthly resistance. And once you truly understand that, you stop walking like someone under threat. You start walking like someone protected. So as we close this message, chosen one, remember this. You are not walking through life alone. Even during the seasons when support seemed absent, when answers felt delayed, and when the pressure appeared overwhelming, there were forces moving on your behalf that you could not yet see. Conversations were happening. Doors were being positioned. Protection was already operating long before you became aware of it. That is why you do not need to live in constant fear of who is against you. Focus instead on who is backing you. Focus on your purpose. Focus on your assignment. Focus on the path that has been placed before you. Because the same power that carried you through your darkest seasons is still carrying you now. Walk confidently. Walk peacefully. Walk with the understanding that not every battle requires your intervention. Some battles are being handled at levels you were never meant to manage. And that is a gift. If this message spoke directly to your spirit today, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another chosen one who needs this reminder. And in the comments, type, "I am protected and positioned." Let that declaration remind you that your story is bigger than the obstacles in front of you, and the support surrounding your life is greater than the opposition standing against it.